what happens when essential systems like dams, pipelines, and desalination plants become targets of conflict. The discussion is part of the broader conversation around Beat Pakistan, a conference by Dawn Media Group that is taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of April in Islamabad, bringing together key voices to address urgent environmental challenges, including water scarcity and climate resilience.
They are dependent on water which is neither in their control nor close to them. So either they import water from other countries or they create that desalination system, which is once again by itself is a hugely environmentally destructive system because the brine that is produced after desalination of seawater is a big environmental hazard. Water resources in that area which have been developed by the locals, and they are not very high tech, but they are very robust. Whereas the infrastructure which is built in cities, even though a city gets a lot of rainfall and it might have a running stream through the city, but then most of those streams running through the urban landscape are mostly polluted. You can't just straight away go and drink water from them. And then the people who are living in the city, their lifestyle is different. They are used to getting water from their faucets, and they don't know how to actually get their own water from a natural resource.
Welcome to another episode of Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm your host, Mahin Azam Khan. Today we're looking at a critical and often overlooked issue: how war fuels water crisis and what happens when essential systems like dams, pipelines, and desalination plants become targets of conflict. The discussion is part of the broader conversation around Beat Pakistan, a conference by Dawn Media Group that is taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of April in Islamabad, bringing together key voices to address urgent environmental challenges, including water scarcity and climate resilience. Today we have with us water expert Hassan Abbas to help unpack these complex and pressing issues. From the Middle East to Ukraine and beyond, the growing intersection of conflict, climate change, and water scarcity is raising serious questions about global stability. Let's dive in. Hello, Hassan Saab. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to begin with, when we think about war, we usually think about casualties or, destroyed cities, but not necessarily water. Can you help us understand how military conflicts directly and indirectly contribute to the water crisis and why this issue, often goes underreported?
Well, first of all, as far as water is concerned, the world is very sensitive about water resources, especially water for drinking purposes and food generation purposes, and generally the water which is needed for the civilian population, which are not the combatants and who are not fighting the war. So on this, the rules are very clear. In Geneva Convention, it was specifically made clear that during armed conflicts or even during the political conflicts, no nation is allowed legally to impact anything related to water supply of the civilian population. That includes not just the direct water supply, but even the energy systems which are behind the water supply, like pumping stations or grid stations, which are feeding the power to those pumps and through which those pipes are running. So it is the indirectly related to water structure. Anything is not to be tampered with or not to be made a target or not to be destroyed. This is, and if it is so, if any country does it, it is accounted as war crime. Now, Rome Statute is very clear about it, that anything which destroys, disrupts the supply of water to the civilian population or the water required for growing food, that is not to be attacked or damaged. Otherwise, it is a war crime. So this is how the water is seen.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we've seen this in the past as well, and in Pakistan as well, that how, water was leveraged by different countries, and it was, used against us. We often also hear about energy grids or oil facilities that are being strategic targets, but water systems like dams, desalination plants, pipelines, and pumping stations are just, as vital. Why is water infrastructure increasingly seen as critical infrastructure, and what makes it so vulnerable, during conflict?
You see, when war breaks out, the things are not under control because they always say that you can start a war, but you cannot finish it. Someone else finishes the war that you start. So whenever these conflicts they begin, the things are going crazy. The things are not under anyone's control. And obviously the water structure gets damaged, the power grid gets damaged, the power supply gets damaged, the fuel supply gets damaged. So all those things are ultimately, if they are linked to the provision of water structures, it becomes vulnerable. So the thing is that during these armed conflicts, although the international laws they specifically forbid it, forbid for any of the fighting factions to actually directly attack water structures, but they get attacked or they get damaged indirectly. Uh, like, for example, your water structure is powered by gasoline powered plants, and the gasoline supply is stopped. So pumps cannot run, and the water is actually impacted. So those are the things which are very, intricately linked, because water supply is linked to every other aspect of life, which is whether it's a military life, or it is the life of combatants, or it is the life of the civilian population. Water will always water is always part of it, and it will always be impacted. So one of the things is that you should make your water structure, because if you are forcing a conflict, you should have some kind of backup plan for the water supply, some kind of risk management in which you do the rationing of water and stuff. So those are the kind of risk management things, and some definitely some kind of security provisions on your water structures. Like, for example, we have two large dams, Mangla and Tarbela. They are both heavily manned by the armed forces, just because they have the potential of becoming a target during an armed conflict. So we do protect it. Similarly, the other countries, especially the countries of the Middle East, they are heavily dependent on imported water from the sea, which is called desalination. And that infrastructure is the lifeline of fresh water, and that is not natural. So, for example, if a dam breaks, that doesn't make the natural system, uh, you know, uh, uh, that doesn't render the natural system out of service, because nature is still bringing water. But in case of desalination plants and that kind of critical infrastructure in the Gulf region where there is no natural water, that becomes even more critical. And attacking any of those infrastructures, desalination plants, it is not just a war crime. It has very, very serious consequences on the population. Yes.
You just mentioned, Gulf countries. So in Gulf, many countries they rely on desalination, as you mentioned, for up to 90% of their drinking water, and of course, disrupting that would be nothing but sort of a war crime. So given this dependence, what happens if even a few desalination plants are damaged or disrupted during conflict? Could this trigger a large-scale national emergency?
Of course, this is an emergency because there are alternatives to oil, but there is no alternate to water. People have to drink water in order to live. It is the second most important thing for life after air. You know, without water, you just cannot live.
Yeah.
So that's the most important thing. I mean, you need to have enough of drinking water for drinking and for preparing your food. And then you need to have at least a minimum amount of water for health and hygiene on daily basis. If you don't have it, I mean, there are so many problems that, imagine not living with water even for one day. It's very hard for a human being. I mean, uh, without water, the maximum a person can survive is a few days. And if water is not there, or it becomes very short in supply, or if it becomes contaminated, that's a death sentence for the society, I mean, say. So this is something very critical, and I don't think so that the people who were going into this war had thoroughly thought about it. So the protection of those works which are so critical in the Gulf, I don't think so much of attention has been paid to them, because this region, especially the Gulf countries, they were considered as one of the most peaceful regions in the world. No conflicts, nothing, no terrorism, nothing like that. So they were just operating those things like there was no risk of this kind. Now, this risk has just propped up, and there is no structural management ever thought about protection of the desalination plants, and not just a deliberate attempt by your adversary to damage those structures. Uh, the the you know the collateral damage that is called, like, you blow up a like you blow up an oil refinery, and that oil refinery was also linked to the power supply of a desalination plant, and that goes with it. So those are the kind of indirect damages which are unavoidable in the wars. So you had to have some kind of risk management plan in order to do that. And I don't think so that any of those plans have ever been thought or thoroughly considered. And this makes it even more critical, because there is no alternate to water. And you can't, if your infrastructure damages, like in a country where a river is flowing, the infrastructure damages, people stop getting water in their pipes, in their faucets, but they can walk up to the water resource and get the water. But here, you can't walk up to the sea and get the water, because your water is coming from the sea through a desalination plant, and if that plant is not working, there is no fresh water there. So that makes those regions even more vulnerable compared to other parts of the world.
And we're seeing that what's happening all around the world. And when I say what's happening all around the world, recent tensions involving Iran and the broader region, have actually exposed how fragile, these systems are. What specific risks has this conflict highlighted? For example, threats to, coastal desalination plants or supply chains, and how prepared are, countries to, deal with such disruptions? Because in the world that we're living now, there is absolutely no guarantee what's going to happen next now.
Okay, this is a very important aspect that you have just talked about. I think the world has realized something, uh, especially start of this century, that realization has gained a lot of impetus. The realization was even in the third quarter of last century, and that was on the sustainability. That word sustainability, it has very deep meaning. It is not just that you protect the birds and the bees and the fish and the frog and you become sustainable. That is just one aspect of environmental sustainability. But sustainability in the long run is a very deep word. And within the definition of sustainability, there's something very important. It says that if a society depends on a resource which is far away from them, which is not under their control, or which is very expensive, and the society is dependent on that resource on daily basis, then that society is unsustainable. That lifestyle is unsustainable. That model is unsustainable. And these Gulf countries, they had been precisely following this unsustainable model. They are dependent on water which is neither in their control nor close to them. So either they import water from other countries, or they create that desalination system, which is once again by itself is a hugely environmentally destructive system, because the brine that is produced after desalination of seawater is a big environmental hazard. And wherever that brine is disposed of, they normally dispose it of away from the shores and somewhere deep down into the sea. And that creates a dead zone for the life. And there's an ecological consequences. So those countries were already living beyond their means, because whatever fresh water is there, that can sustain a finite amount of population. And this concept of the limits to growth. Now, water is a very important factor which defines the limits to growth. How many people can live in a certain place would be defined by how much water they have. And if they do not have that much water, they will have to get that water from somewhere else, and then they will not be sustainable in the long run. And just a little shock here and there, and this has become something very, very critical thing. Now, Strait of Hormuz, we are only listening that 20% of the global oil and 25% of natural gas, LPG, is flowing through that strait, and the whole world is dependent on it, and it's become very critical, blah, blah, blah. But nobody is talking that it is the Strait of Hormuz from where the food is going in to all those Gulf countries, because they don't produce their food. They don't have enough water to drink, let alone produce their own food. So food is produced by water, and that is also going into those Gulf countries from the Strait of Hormuz. A lot of food is actually shipped to these countries, and that shipping is not taking place right now. So there could not just be water crisis, but there could be food crisis in the Gulf countries. And their airports are not operating. So air sorties are also not guaranteed. So they have put themselves in a very precarious position, or this war has actually put themselves in a very precarious position, that they cannot have enough of food and enough of water. Those dependent on their oil can live without it, without dying. And there are alternates to energy systems, but not to food and water. And this war has actually exposed that dilemma of their so-called progress, where more people start coming there because they are offering more business opportunities, but at the same time, they are straining the natural resources. And that is why those locations, the world should realize now that those locations are not for the business community, because business, you cannot do business with a lot of people where there is something as necessary, as critical as water is in short supply. And whatever the supply mechanisms you establish there, they are vulnerable to armed conflicts, to political tensions. So I think what the Gulf countries should learn from this is that they should not plan on growing their cities in that part of the world. Whatever growth has taken place over there, even that would be unsustainable. And they should give this space to other parts of the world where people can sit and do the business. And they should only concentrate on the critical service that they are doing to the world is providing them with oil and gas. And anything beyond the oil and gas should not be done, and any business beyond oil and gas should not be done in that part of the world.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned that, this war has exposed, a lot of things, and it has exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. And sometimes what we're seeing on television and what we're seeing through media, we're seeing different parts of the story, and we actually are not really aware of the, on the ground situation that's happening in those countries. So, when water infrastructure is hit, whether through bombings or cyber disruptions, what do you think that looks like, on the ground? For instance, how quickly do these communities lose access to, safe drinking water, and what are the immediate public health consequences?
Well, as far as Gulf countries are concerned, I mean, they are immediate. Those consequences are immediate because you're not getting water in your tap. What can you do? I mean, you go to a convenience store, you can buy few bottles of water, but that convenience store is not being replenished. So how many bottles of water you can bring home and store it? So, as I mentioned earlier, uh, that region doesn't have a stream or a lake or even underground water where you can walk and get a few liters of water for you and your family. So that impact is very critical in that part of the world where everything is artificial. So that artificiality has been exposed. And this is what the world should learn, that you should respect the limits the nature has put on economic growth. You should grow at a geographical location as much as the nature allows you to. So going beyond your means, going beyond your, cut your coat according to the cloth. That's a very famous saying. So if you overstep that, then sooner or later something very unexpected can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, talking about different regions, if we, talk about Ukraine, in Ukraine, like millions struggle to access, safe drinking water after attack on dams, pipelines, and treatment plants. We've seen similar patterns, in Gaza and in Yemen as well. Can you walk us through, one or two examples that really illustrate how devastating this can be for civilians?
Well, one of the things about Ukraine is that these people they have a lot of agriculture production, and especially large infrastructure like dams and canals, which are connected to their irrigation infrastructure. That is very devastating for their agriculture economy. But in the short run, for the people, those who are living in the cities, they are always more vulnerable to water shortages than people who are living in the rural areas. Because the rural areas are in the nature, and there are always some kind of water resources in that area which have been developed by the locals, and they are not very high tech, but they are very robust. Whereas the infrastructure which is built in cities, even though a city gets a lot of rainfall, and it might have a running stream through the city, but then most of those streams running through the urban landscape are mostly polluted. You can't just straight away go and drink water from them. And then the people who are living in the city, their lifestyle is different. They are used to getting water from their faucets, and they don't know how to actually get their own water from a natural resource. Uh, so whether there is water shortage in a country or no, the urban infrastructure is more vulnerable to water shortages because people are not adapted to getting their own water from anywhere else except the faucet. or the convenience store. From there, they get the bottled water. So it is more the damage to the water structures is also a cultural and societal kind of an issue, your lifestyle issue, that what kind of lifestyle you are in, and that would be, that would govern basically how much impact you get from the disruption in water resources.
Absolutely. We keep on mentioning this term that, water is being used as a weapon, and we keep on, describing it as well. So, just touching upon on that, there is obviously growing evidence that, water is always used as a weapon in war and, when things are not going right in the world. So, whether it's blocking rivers or destroying dams or cutting off supply lines, how are different actors, weaponizing water, and what are the long-term implications that you see?
I think one of the best examples of weaponization of waters is weaponizing the water for peace. A weapon against war, not for war. That's the best weapon the water can be. And one of the best examples of this is, I think, the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Now, Netherlands is, for example, a country which receives about 90% of their water from outside its boundaries. So there are the water flowing into Netherlands is coming from other countries. Like we have part of our water coming from India and part from Afghanistan and China. So they have 90% of their water coming from the other countries. And they have weaponized that water. How they did it? They created port facilities at the delta of Rhine River. And they started the use of water as a hub of trade and connecting waterways, inland waterways through Rhine and all the way to Danube, and in the up countries, France, Germany, even up to Switzerland and all across Europe. So they just created a waterway, and now the countries which are upstream, if they block water for Holland, their shipping will be impacted. So their trade and commerce will be impacted. What they did, instead of fighting for water and letting their upstream neighbors weaponize that water against them, they weaponized this water for peace. And because when you are mutually dependent on a trade route, it is in the interest of both countries to stay connected, to keep trading, because it benefits both of them. So that is the kind of dividend water can bring. Now, using water as a weapon of war, this is again not a new concept. I think somewhere in Mesopotamia, many centuries ago, I don't remember the exact years, uh, there was this king who actually built a large dam and then suddenly released it in order to flood his enemies. And that is one of the oldest uses of water as a weapon in an armed conflict. Similarly, now the weaponization of water that we see India is trying to do since 1948, because
Yeah.
the way they used the water against us was weaponization of water. They cut off the flows, which was actually even at that time a war crime. They committed that. We never pursued it as a war crime. Uh, but they are still trying to do it. They want to use this water against us. They want to still coerce us into doing something by threatening our water resources. They are polluting our water resources. So that is where the water is being used as a weapon, and it is not just a weapon of war. It is also a weapon of prejudice, prejudiced politics, and we are a victim of that as well. And water is not used as a weapon only in armed conflicts. It is a continuous kind of a thing when you use it as a weapon. Like if you start controlling the water of somebody, uh, you can control so many other things with the control of water. And that is something that we have seen. If we look at the history of Indus Basin, that is what the British did when they created these canal colonies after the fall of Punjab in 1849. So what they did, they put a weir and on the river and take a canal out of it, and then everybody is brought in there for developing agriculture through that canal. But the control is with the authorities. They can anytime shut the gates of that canal and let the whole place get into trouble. So just by controlling the water, you can control the population of hundreds of villages which are dependent on that one single gate. So this is how you start weaponizing water against your colonial subjects. That was in the times of British, and even today we are seeing within our own canal circles that the powerful controls the water through the canal infrastructure, which was a gift by the British colonialism. So this weaponization of water is not just between the countries at the time of war. It is, especially in our case, it is, rooted at every level between the provinces, between the countries, and within the canal commands, at every water course. There is a weaponization of water. People are being controlled through water. Water is being used as weapon. So it is not just in case of war. It is also a peacetime controlling mechanism and a weapon which is used during peacetime as well. So
Yeah.
there's a big history and big diversity of canvas on which water is used as a weapon.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think that this issue, intersect with climate change? Because climate change is also one of the most pressing issues that we face in today's world, with half the world, already facing water scarcity at some point, each year, including Pakistan. We are entering a feedback loop, where water shortages they fuel conflict, and conflict in terms, worsens water scarcity.
I think this is a very important aspect of this whole discussion because as I started with the definition of sustainability, uh, it goes back and touches that definition once again. Sustainability. Whatever we do with our water resources is going to have an impact on the climatic conditions, and whatever is being and whatever is happening to the climate systems is impacting our water resources. Because what is climate change? Basically, it is the change in the energy of the planet. Energy budget of the planet is changing. And that energy budget, the change in which we are actually seeing getting more energy on the planet, and that more energy is manifesting itself in terms of warming oceans, warm air, and warm oceans then move bigger storms, more moisture in the air, stronger winds, and all those combined together, bigger storms, bigger, hurricanes, typhoons, gale force winds, bigger storm systems, bigger monsoon systems, and at the same time, the same energy systems is also creating conditions of drought where more heat expels water from a certain part of the world. So that kind of rearranging of the global climate is taking place. And in that rearranging, water is the most important component which impacts every single life on the planet. Not just human life, every single living cell is impacted by that. So the wars, whenever they take place, uh, they do not care about environment. Guess what? All those, you know, explosions taking place, release of a lot of energy, where that energy is ultimately going to sink in the environment, in the air. So it's getting warmer and warmer. And then the industries which are producing those weapons and explosives, they are also creating a lot of environmental problems, a lot of chemicals and everything. So it is not just that the water uh, quality, it is not just that the water systems globally are being impacted. It is the water quality and air quality which is also being impacted by all those chemicals which are used in those weapons. And God forbid if anything happens on the nuclear side, then it would be a completely different story altogether. And water
Yeah.
remains the most vulnerable thing because if, for example, this green climate funding, which is being used to regenerate and sustain the ecological systems, uh, it would have a very very severe setback because of these ongoing wars. And the economy of the world, which could have been and should have been directed towards making this planet better again, is now going to make it worse again, because obviously all the countries are impacted by the war, whether they are part of it or they are not part of it. They are directly or indirectly being impacted. And when they are being impacted, they do things which take priority over climate restoration, over more, climate friendly investments, because then it becomes survival first and climate later. So I think this is a big dent. All such events, they cause a big dent in the momentum which takes decades to generate towards achieving some noble goals for the humanity, for the planet, for the other forms of life on the planet. And they just get, they just get crashed on their way. So I think this is not a good thing which is happening. And it is very tragic for humanity, it is very tragic for the environment. And I think we should give peace a chance. uh, these things are not sustainable for this generation or for the coming generations, and peace should be given a chance. We should condemn all things bad happening as during this war.
Absolutely. I think now, it's a matter of fact that at first, we actually used to start thinking about the future generation. Now we're so unsure about our own future as well. And like you said, that yes, peace should definitely be given a chance, and peace is the only way, and peace is the only hope that we have. So finally, looking ahead, what do you think can be done just to wrap up the conversation? Should water infrastructure be given the same level of international protection as hospitals under humanitarian law? And what practical steps can governments and global institutions take to safeguard, water systems during conflicts?
I think the first thing every government at every tier of administration, like starting from the central government down to the city councils and even the union councils and all those levels, uh, this water supply systems should have some kind of backup planning and a risk management planning, that if anything gets damaged, maybe because of a natural disaster, maybe due to earthquake or something, if anything happens like that, there should be a backup plan. There should be an emergency plan. There should be a system of water rationing and stuff, so that everybody gets water, and people are not get deprived of water. And those kind of risk management plans, they do exist in some parts of the world, where especially the earthquake prone zones in advanced countries like Japan, uh, they have this kind of planning. So I think this is the time we should engage with that existing knowledge, with the people who have the experience of actually managing those kind of systems, and we should have those systems in place around every water supply structure, whether it is for irrigation water supply or industrial water supply or a domestic water supply or a municipal water supply. So those risk management plans must be prepared. If they have not been prepared until today, they must be prepared. And if you are ready, you have a backup plan, then you always know what is the first step if a disaster hits. If you don't have anything like that, you have never thought about it, there is no wargaming about it, then you are totally surprised. And when you are surprised, you mostly end up in panic, and panic doesn't yield very good results.
Absolutely. And now we've seen that today's world is actually, full of surprises and anything can be done. And nobody is safe and nobody is secure. So it's best to, actually come up with this plan. And it's best to actually invest in, risk management plans, whether it's about water, whether it's about food security or, everything else that's, impacting and happening in the world. And all we can hope for is a better world, and all we can hope for is this war to stop as soon as possible. Thank you so much, Hassan Saab, for your brilliant insights. As we've discussed today, water is no longer just a basic resource, it's increasingly becoming a point of vulnerability and even a tool in times of conflict. From damaged infrastructure to disrupted supply systems, the impacts are immediate and deeply human. And when you add climate change and growing scarcity into the mix, the risks only intensify. These are exactly the kind of challenges being brought into focus at Breathe Pakistan, taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of April in Islamabad, where conversations across and around water scarcity and climate resilience are becoming more urgent than ever. A big thank you to Hassan Abbas for sharing his insights with us today. And thank you for listening to Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm Mahin Azam Khan, and see you next time.
Breathe Pakistan.
A Dawn Media initiative.
Let's weather the change
Together.